Part 4, Chapter 1, The Drúedain. So, if you recall from the Silmarillion, there are three groups of men, that is, humans, who cross over the Blue Mountains into Beleriand: the House of Beor, the Haladin, later known as the House of Haleth, and the folk of Marach, later known as the House of Hador. The House of Beor and the folk of Marach speak the same Mannish language, but the Haladin speak a completely different Mannish language. Indeed, they are a people apart, and even though they are allies against Morgoth, they prefer to live in and guard their woods, and not participate in great wars or lofty matters. They have customs that are strange to elves and other men alike, such as having a tradition of women warriors, like their eventual leader Haleth, who even has an all-female bodyguard. But their most interesting custom is how they keep company. When they come over the Blue Mountains, there is yet another subgroup of men who travel with them. These people are known by their elvish name, Drúedain, which is based on their own word for themselves, Drúhu. There aren't that many of them, only a few hundred, and according to elves and most men, they appear rather homely. Oh, how rude. Well, this is because they are short, broad, and a bit stumpy, kind of like dwarves, except they most certainly are not as hairy as dwarves. In fact, only a few elder men are able to grow any facial hair at all. And when they do, it's just scraggly hair from their chins. They have broad faces, flat noses, and small black eyes that are deep set and glow red when they're angered. They have deep guttural voices, and they can be quite grim and fierce at times. However, when they laugh, anyone around them is going to start laughing too, because their merriment is just so uninhibited. They live rather simple, almost Spartan lives. The only drink they ever consume is water, and they eat sparingly, even during times of plenty. They were content to live in tents or shelters, lightly built around the trunks of large trees, for they were a hardy race. They had used caves in the mountains, but mainly as storehouses, only occupied as dwellings and sleeping places in severe weather. Their weapons of choice for fighting orcs are poisoned darts, which, by the way, they do not use against any other living thing. They are fantastic allies to the Haladin because they are relentless in their hatred of orcs. But unfortunately, they don't live as long as the other Edain, and they're already small in numbers to begin with, so by the end of the First Age, they've dwindled to no more than a few families. But anyway, in their early days, they pretty much don't go abroad, preferring to stay near the House of Haleth. That means that during the First Age, they live in the forest of Brethiel. They are great trackers of bird and beast, and they have a stronger sense of smell and eyesight than other men. Their knowledge of living things is almost as good as the elves. So these guys are really connected to nature. And they don't have a writing system, but, why would they need one, right? Instead, they prefer to carve and draw on wood and stone. In fact, they're so good at carving figures out of stone that their statues sometimes appear lifelike. They especially like sculpting giant statues of themselves squatting on dead orcs. They call these statues watchstones because they place them at the entrance of trails and along woodland paths. And orcs are so afraid of these figures that if they see them, they usually just turn around and go back the way they came. One amazing skill that the Drúedain have is the ability to sit still and meditate for long periods of time. I mean, we're talking days on end. In fact, the House of Haleth has a little story relating to this. Once upon a time, a Drúedain made a statue of his dead father, which he had set up on a pathway near his home. Then he sat down beside the statue and fell into a deep meditation for many days. One day, a woodsman passed by and bowed to the two figures, the one stone, the other living, thinking they were both alive. Then he thought, oh, no, these are both statues. Ha, so lifelike. 3 days later, the woodsman passed by again, and this time he sat down to rest against the Drúedain who was meditating. He hung his wet cloak over the Drúedain's shoulders to dry, and then he fell asleep. But he was woken up by a voice behind him, saying, I hope you are rested, but if you wish for more sleep, I beg you to move to the other one. He will never need to stretch his legs again, and I find your cloak too hot in the sun. The Druedain fall into these silences for a number of reasons: to contemplate grief or loss, to take pleasure in thought, or to make important plans. But they're especially good at using this ability to sit still when on guard, because if they sit in the shadows, then the enemy can't see them, but rather feel their hostility. The House of Haleth esteem them as guards in the forest. But if Druedain are not available or currently nearby, the people of Haleth might set up these watchstones as guards, believing the stones to be imbued with the magic and essence of their makers. In fact, here's another tale from the House of Haleth regarding the supposed magic of the Druedain watchstones. It's called the Faithful Stone. Once upon a time, there was a Druedain called Agan who was friends with a man of the House of Haleth called Barach. Barach lived far away from any village, and the closest people nearby were Agan and his family. So Agan spent a lot of time with Barach and his family, and they all liked him. But one day, they got news that there were some orcs who had infiltrated the forest and were attacking any houses far out in the woods. Agan kept guard for Barach at his house, but one day he told Barach that his brother was wounded by orcs and only he had the skill to save him, so he had to go away, which greatly distressed Barach's family. But before he went, he left a great watchstone near the house, and he laid his hand on it, transferring some magic to it. So nothing bad happened for a couple nights, but on the third night, Barach was roused from bed and saw two orcs trying to set fire to his house. Then suddenly he saw a Druedain come running up behind them, killing one and causing the other to flee in terror. Then the Druedain stomped out the flames with his bare feet. Barach rushed downstairs and out the door, but when he got there, the Druedain was gone, as was the body of the dead orc. So Barach went back inside and went back to sleep. The next morning, he found that the watchstone was gone. Later on that day, Agan returned, having healed his brother already. Barach showed him where the fire was and told him all about the two orcs, as well as about the missing watchstone. Then Agan started walking around the property as if looking for something, until he finally led Barach to a place where they found the watchstone, sitting on the dead orc from the night before. But the watchstone's legs were all blackened and cracked as if by fire. Then Agan sat down and undid his boots, revealing bandages over his feet and legs. He told Barach that he slept all last night, but when he woke up, he was in pain, explaining, "Alas, if some power passes from you to a thing that you have made, then you must take a share in its hurts." Now, let me finish this video with a little discussion of geography. So, after the War of Wrath happens and the remaining Edain are allowed to go to Númenor, the Druedain actually come along with them. While in the peaceful land of Númenor, their numbers do eventually increase, but they never participate in any sea voyages or campaigns in Middle-earth because they're terrified of the sea. And apparently, during the reign of Tar Aldarion, the Druedain urge him not to continue with his voyages. They have a strange foresight that forebodes evil if he keeps going back to Middle-earth. But of course he ignores them, and ever since then the Druedain in Númenor become restless, feeling that the good times will not last. So, one by one, they eventually get passage on ships going to northwest Middle-earth, despite their fear of the sea. And whenever anyone asks them why they're leaving, they say, "The Great Isle no longer feels sure under our feet, and we wish to return to the lands whence we came." And by the time Sauron shows up in Númenor, the Druedain have all left, so they're basically safe from the downfall. But you know what? This isn't the full story of all the Druedain. Back when the first men are migrating into Beleriand, not all the Druedain go there. Some remain behind in the east. An emigrant branch of the Druedain accompanied the folk of Haleth at the end of the First Age, and dwelt in the forest of Brethiel with them. But most of them had remained in the White Mountains. But these Druedain are eventually driven out and persecuted by evil men, so that by the Second Age, they only live here and here. And by the Third Age, their numbers are so reduced that it's thought among most men that they only live here now. However, there is evidence that a few still live in Drúedain, but they're so secretive that no one has any dealings with them whatsoever. And of course, in The Lord of the Rings, we see the Drúedain who live here help the Rohirrim by guiding them through the forest. And finally, an interesting linguistic note. At one point in The Return of the King, Elfhelm says to Merry, "You hear the Woses? The wild men of the woods." The word woes is a modernization of the Old English word wassa, found in the term wudu-wassa, meaning wild man of the woods. Tolkien borrowed this idea for wild men of the woods from a common motif in medieval European illuminations and heraldry. And indeed, some modern European cities and regions still have these wild men figures in their coats of arms. So there you go, that's where the Drúedain came from. That was Tolkien's inspiration. And lastly, I really like the Drúedain. They just want to live simple, free lives where they can mind their own business in peace. I especially appreciate how they are the only group of men who remain uncorrupted by the dark powers. In ages past, they had paid no heed to the great Dark One, Morgoth, nor did they later ally themselves with Sauron, for they hated all invaders from the east.